It is time to talk the possibilities of Abdul Carter being a Jacksonville Jaguar. I'll clear up some misconceptions about that on this edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are y'all doing? It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, a podcast where you can find wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure wherever you watch or listen, you tap in each and every day so you do not miss an episode. I got to let you know that today's show is brought to you and sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And a quick shout out to the everydayers for joining us here every day on the podcast. We definitely appreciate it. As we are leading up to the draft, we're continuing to look at possibilities for Jacksonville and likelihoods and all possible scenarios to kind of mentally prepare everybody for what's going to happen. So today's show is dedicated to Abdul Carter. It's not going to be scattered, but it's just going to be me telling you some facts about what I believe. Just two halves, even though there's three segments. What if they drafted Abdul Carter is where we're going to start. And then if they did, who should they get next? I think that's a big, big question. And in the middle of all of that, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about best player available, and I'm not going to contradict myself. And we're going to talk about possible comps and who Abdul Carter can play like and who he can replace. All right, so here, let's get started with it. First of all, if Abdul Carter falls to number 5, there are a lot of people that's going to need their heads examined because I do believe he is the second best player in this draft. And I didn't say second best non-quarterback. I have Cam Ward listed right behind him. I think the best player in the draft is Travis Hunter. The second best player in the draft is Abdul Carter. Okay? Now, let's get to the gist of it as to what I think about Carter as a prospect. I think he's fabulous. I think he looks just like all of those dudes that go to the NFL and end up being exactly what you thought they are and thought they were. He talks with a lot of confidence. He is a coach's dream. These are some of the same things I said about Travis Hunter, but I'm now saying this about Abdul Carter. So I know there's some people that's going to go, well, that's a 180. No, it really isn't. I've often talked about people that ask you questions or make statements and they're loaded. So the reason why I've always felt the way that I've felt or responded to anybody talking about them taking Abdul Carter, and this is when we thought they were going to have a top 2 or a top 3 pick, right? I've always responded to a certain group of people. Those group of people wanted to move Trayvon Walker to 3 technique or trade him. When it comes to that, that is where I go, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do all of that. And it's not because I like Trayvon. I've talked to members of his family on a couple of occasions, and I really, really think he's a real, real good kid. Don't leave it up to me to be defending a Trent Baalke draft pick. Y'all know how I feel about that. But I will look at what it is. This ain't about favoritism. This is about looking at somebody from a football perspective and saying he's a really, really good player. And I don't know if you realize this, but the Jaguars haven't won a whole bunch in 30 years. I know one way to not win and continue to not win is to get rid of really, really good football players when you don't have to. And I realized, I said, okay, if they draft Travis Hunter, he's cornerback 1, and that pushes everybody down, including Jarian Jones. I'm not talking about that. What I am talking about, if you notice, I said they do that. I didn't say they needed to trade Jarian Jones. I didn't. So why would you want to trade Trayvon Walker, not get any value back from him, just to replace him with Abdul Carter? Well, some people say, well, he has more pass rush upside. All right, sure. He got that same pass rush upside if he came to you at number 5 and you can get him. So then there's the question about the allocation of resources to one position. You take a guy top 5, how can he play the same position as someone else that you took number 1 and someone else that you gave $120 million? Wig, it don't make sense. Make it make sense. We need our best players on the field. Ding dong, there it is. You can actually put them all on the field without moving Trayvon Walker inside in your base defense. How, you ask? Well, there's a team in Dallas called the Dallas Cowboys that takes a player, and the player that I most comp Abdul Carter to, and ironically went to the same school and they wear the same number. And the Dallas Cowboys have had so many pass rushers that all of them keep getting big-time deals. Washington signed 2 of them last year, right? DeMarcus Lawrence leaves. He gets big money this year to go somewhere, right? Dallas ain't hurting. They still got other pass rushers. The one thing Jerry Jones has done good the last 10 years, it's like the same thing Jerry Jones did with the offensive line prior to that. They just keep stacking people left and right. You know who leads the league in pressure percentage since he's been in the NFL? Micah Parsons. You know where Micah Parsons lines up on first and mostly second down? Stack linebacker, right behind a big old defensive lineman. Sometimes in the middle, sometimes off the ball on the outside, sometimes at Sam. You don't know where he's coming from. There's a perfect example right there of how you use your talent when you have it. Wade Phillips would be celebrating what I'm saying right now because he is the master of, if you have a great player, you find a way to design your scheme around the great players. Anthony Campanile is the same way, in my opinion. I did take a couple of pictures. I'll probably post them. I didn't want to put them here in the podcast, so I might get a chance to, but I'll probably post them online to show you exactly what I mean and how easy it is to do this without moving another player to a position. By the way, Trayvon was really heavy last year at the urging of certain coaches. He got his weight up. You probably can't tell because the dude is just yoked up and he's a muscular dude, but he wasn't real comfortable with that, and he still got 10 sacks. Well, I heard that weight's coming back down now a little bit, and he's going to be even more able to get after the pass rush, or rather the quarterback. I think he's going to be more adept to it. Basically, what I'm telling y'all is this. I have heard for 3.5 years now how they need to be using Devin Lloyd. That's exactly how they would use Abdul Carter, in my opinion, even though it's not the same coaching staff. How many times have you heard people say, well, you got to turn Devin Lloyd loose, let him rush the passer? On certain downs, you need to stack him, maybe put him in the A-gap or put him outside both of your pass rushers when you got a 5-man front. There you go. That's how it works. Maybe even on passing downs, you could slide Trayvon in a little bit where he's like a 4-eye or 3 technique or whatever, and then you can stack Abdul Carter on the outside of him to create mismatches. There are a lot of things you can do. Go back and look at the Illinois game, Illinois and Penn State. There's a kid named Luke Altmaier I wanted to pray for after I watched those highlights because it was a sad, sad sight, in my opinion, watching Luke Altmaier try to get away and run from this dude all day. In a lot of those situations, Abdul Carter lined up at Mike linebacker, sometimes on second down, sometimes on third down. And he didn't rush. He spied the quarterback and spied anybody who was coming out of that backfield trying to leak out. And he was able to not get outflanked by anybody. You start running out of that pocket, he was going to beat you to the sideline, right? I want the Jacksonville Jaguars to get a whole bunch of these dudes together and whoop people with them, not trade them around like little pieces that fit into a box. So, yeah, that's how I think you can use Abdul Carter. I'm going to talk a little bit about it more, and then I'm going to actually show you a formation where I want you to count the people in Green Bay's fronts. And this doesn't mean Jaguars are going to do this, but I want you to figure this out, man. There's a way you can get all of these guys on the field in your base defense. Abdul Carter is just that good. I'll talk more about that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. As told you at the top of the show, today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Game Time. Imagine watching your favorite team and feeling the energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Now, mandatory that you pay attention to this. Game Time Picks is a curation process that makes it easier to find a better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. Everyone doesn't have that, man. The curation makes the process so much easier and actually makes you want to come back for more. Now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, man, we're going to move along here on Locked On NFL, Locked On Jaguars, Locked On NFL. All, I get confused sometimes what show that I'm doing, but it's Locked On Jaguars here today, even though it is in the NFL. And we're talking about NFL draft stuff. We're talking about the Jaguars and their possibilities. I do not believe Abdul Carter lasts to the 5th pick. I also do not believe that little stress fracture that he has in his foot is going to have any bearing on where he's picked. It might have one or two teams saying, because a lot of teams, like, injuries can happen. It's not that serious. People just don't like knowing that what they're buying is already damaged a little bit. And it's not really any damage. His foot will be stronger than ever. Julio Jones kind of had the same thing. But I told y'all I was going to show a formation and show a little bit of something when I was watching the tape. And I don't think this is the Illinois tape. No, it's not, because this is a pro tape. This is the Green Bay Packers. These are the Green Bay Packers lined up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, it's going to last about 5 seconds if you're watching. If not, I'll explain it to you. They got 7 guys up on the line of scrimmage, and they're all in all weird formations, right? I'll show it again just in case you didn't see it. This is how I envision the Jaguars being on 3rd and short or on 2nd and long. I envision them having their best players on the field at once. Abdul Carter can play stack linebacker. And I made sure it was a phrase that my buddy off Locked On NFL draft, Coach Keith Sanchez, he used it. And I kind of figured I knew exactly what he was talking about and where he was going. But what I did was, just to make sure, I looked up the definition. And the definition that I saw of a stacked linebacker was any linebacker that lines up behind the line of scrimmage, directly behind a defensive lineman. Keith Sanchez believes that part of Abdul Carter's game is actually better than Micah Parsons was. In fact, Parsons lasted to the 11th pick in the draft because, ironically, the one thing he did not do a lot of is get sacks in college. And this is why I often tell people that it, to me, is a projection pick. And what I mean by that is, projection isn't always like, okay, one day he'll learn how to do it. Projection sometimes is, oh, no, we know he can do it based on his athletic traits. Therefore, when he gets to the NFL, he pops up and gets double-digit sacks, and he's one of the hardest people in the league to maintain and blocking. You got to figure out where he is every single play. Just because a guy didn't do something in college does not mean he can't do it in the pros, and that's where the traits and the projection comes in. That projection isn't always where a guy's going to be in year 3 or year 4. Projection is, we got to figure out and look at his body and look at his athleticism and ask ourselves, if we ask him to do a specific thing, that he's going to be able to do it, even though he didn't do it in college. So this is where a lot of times with the verbiage, a lot of us get really, really confused. I don't think he's Quay Walker. They're about the same size, but I don't think Abdul Carter is Quay Walker, where he is pure off the ball, pure stack, right? And can't rush the passer unless he's blitzing. I think he's more like Micah Parsons, where he can do both. I have seen the film, and I'm telling you, if you watch the Illinois Penn State tape from 2024, you will see him a lot lined up on 3rd down at middle linebacker. But he's off. And when the ball is hiked, he takes 2 or 3 steps back, and he's just watching the quarterback and watching anybody else that bleeds or comes on those shallow crosses, and he lights them up each and every time. There is nothing about his game or his ability that tells me he can't do that here. They're a base 4-3 team. I think you're going to see more 3 linebacker sets for the Jaguars than you have in a long, long time. Most of the time they come out with base 4-2-5. They haven't really been a base 4-3 team since Gus Bradley left, and they were trying to figure out how to use Miles Jack. But I'm telling you, man, this is the same reason I like Jalen Carter. This is the same, not Jalen Carter, Jalen Walker, because I think while he's a little bit smaller and built a little bit different and probably has played more stacker off the ball linebacker than Micah has, they got a lot of the same characteristics and traits. They're just, I said somebody the other day, I said, if you could take, I would say a piece of hair out of James Harrison's head, but he don't got no hair. If you could take a piece of James Harrison's beard, Debo, who's about 6'1", 250, and then you could take a little piece of Telvin Smith's hair and kind of entwine it together, then you get Jalen Walker. You just get a football player. That's what you get. He's 6'1.5", 248 pounds. With long arms, he's just a maniacal football player with really, really quick feet. I think Jalen Carter is a little bit different than that. Not Jalen Carter. Abdul Carter is a little bit different than that. Shout out to Mike Dempsey, because let me tell you something. I listened to Mike Dempsey yesterday here in Jacksonville, and Mike Dempsey said that he was going to eventually call Jalen Walker Jalen Carter and Abdul Carter Abdul Walker. And I'll be damned if I ain't sitting up here doing it, because I'm thinking about Jalen Carter, who played at Georgia. But the thing is listen, good coaches don't get rid of good football players. They stack them. Don't you want whatever you think Jalen Carter would be on the field with Trayvon and Josh? It's somebody else's job to figure out where and how, but you can do that without putting Trayvon at a disadvantage and putting him inside. Trayvon's probably going to be 270, 275. You can get away with that if you run certain fronts. J.J. Watt was what, 285, 290? Cam Jordan is about what, 285, 290? I get that. We got to stop trying to just comp guys to other people and say, well, do this or do that. Let's let Trayvon Walker just be Trayvon Walker. And we can let Abdul Carter be Abdul Carter. And it ain't against the law for you to figure out that both of those guys can actually be on the field at the same time. They're both extremely versatile, extremely athletic. Now, I'm going to tell you this. If they take Abdul Carter and do what I suggest, there is something I think they need to do on top of that. What is that? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you here on Locked On Jaguars in just a second. It's your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. Now I want you to listen. I think it would behoove of the team that if they did take Jalen Carter, to not necessarily give up on, but I would do any and everything in my power to get back into the first round at the end of that first round and try my best to get the defensive tackle, that nose tackle out of Michigan. Because when you're running all of these fronts, the one thing you're really going to need, you're going to need to be sturdy in that middle. So whether it's him or Darius Alexander or Farmer from Florida State, at some point on day 2, I will want, and if not on day 2, maybe at the end of day 2 or the beginning of day 3, even if you got Jamari Caldwell, I think the Jaguars, in order to do this, where you're going to have these guys on the field at one time, we still have to address the fact that they gave up too much in the middle last year. And I think guys like that, guys that live to be nothing but guys in that area, guys that want to take up space, guys that love the dirty work, and that are also active enough that on passing downs, they're not a liability. I hope Devon Hamilton gets back to being his normal self and starts tracking to where it looked like he was tracking early. But the guy I'm describing is Marcel Darius. That's what I'm describing. I'm describing Marcel Darius. And for people that can be a little bit older than that and go back with me, I'm talking about Gary Walker. That's the kind of guy that I'm talking about. An unsung hero of the defense. I ain't necessarily talking about John Henderson or Marcus Stroud. But those were two guys that neither one of them looked like a traditional nose tackle, but they played very well together, right? I think that's what you have to do. You have to address that. That's why so many people are on Mason Graham as a draft selection, and they should be. Mason Graham's a big-time player. He is a big-time player. Sometimes I have a hard time trying to figure out exactly where they're going to be able to play him and how they're going to be able to incorporate him into the defense. But make no mistake about it, I do believe that there's a way you could get all of these dudes on the field at one time. There's no doubt in my mind that could be done at all. I mean, no doubt in my mind at all that you can get these dudes on the field at the same time. I'm talking about Kenneth Grant, big Kenneth Grant, 6'3", 339 pounds. If the Jaguars do that and they still have 2/3 and 2/4 in a draft where the wide receivers are deep, in a draft where that extra safety you might need, that's not a real deep area, but there will be corners, developmental offensive linemen, possibly even a running back. The Jaguars can do everything that they want to do if they end up getting those two players first. Now, to move back up in the first round, it's going to cost you some of that stuff that I just talked about. It won't cost you another first-round pick, but you might have to give up a second and third. Whether you do that in 25 or 26, I don't know. But that's what I would really love to see him do. The more I keep doing these mocks and the more I do Locked On NFL and listen to the clips that we use on that show, by the way, tap into it twice a day, I realize that it's okay to take a real good part of your team and just make it great. Take an area, take the best. This is the old H. Ross Perot theory. Whatever you have, that's the best thing that you have. Even make that even better before you start going to everything else, because you can at least lead with that. Well, the Jaguars would lead with having fast, quick, twitchy dogs on their team. Will they give up if they're not able to get another defensive tackle? Would they give up a little bit in terms of, like, everybody gives up something, right? What I envision is, what if you had an every down George Karlaftis? You have an every down player who's that as a pass rusher or better, and I think Abdul Carter is better, but he can also play like Chenal, the linebacker for Kansas City. But you got that in one guy, and I think he'd be better at both of those things than that player. I'm telling you, it can be pulled off. And that's the reason I'm talking about this, because I think people got misunderstood when I said that I would say no on Abdul Carter. I said the only reason I was saying no on Abdul Carter is because, in my opinion, Travis Hunter is an equal prospect, or whether you think he's better, he's close enough. And there are other players at other positions where you could say, okay, well, I can deal with that. Like if you move down and you got Mike Green and you got an extra second-round pick to bail, I wouldn't argue with that either. I wouldn't argue if they moved back a couple of picks and took Jalen Walker. I wouldn't argue with that either. Hell, if Will Campbell's medicals check out, I wouldn't be mad if they did that either. But the possibility, because of the way things are moving in front of them, with the likelihood that Cam Ward is going to be picked, the possibility that Shedeur Sanders is not going to be picked, you had folks sitting there thinking like, okay, or that Shedeur Sanders would also be picked, by Cleveland, because the Giants look like they must, either they don't like Shedeur or they figure he's going to be gone, but Cleveland is sitting there quiet and they need a quarterback. And they didn't get Russell Wilson, who they were pushing for a little bit. Yeah, I think it's a possibility if two quarterbacks go and the Patriots sit there and draft an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman, as I have been told by people who are very familiar with the way Mike Vrabel moves, that is more of a likelihood and possibility. I could see a situation where when you get to number 5, either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter sitting there. Hey, I don't think there's a situation where they'll both be sitting. The only way that happens to me is if I think the Giants are going to. I think if you get to number 3 and Travis Hunter's on the board, the Giants are going to take Travis Hunter. But if they didn't, and they move more towards Mason Graham, and they said, okay, no, what we're going to do is we're going to make the defensive line almost unblockable. We're putting him next to Dexter Lawrence, sandwiched by our edge rushers. If that's what they decide to do, you could see the Patriots then taking Mimbu or Will Campbell. So now you can get to the point where you're at number 5 and they're both there. That's when I call whoever's sitting at number 6. And if the Raiders are sitting there, the Raiders are like, nah, we're going to take the running back. Well, I call the Jets. And I go back and I just take the one that falls to me and get an extra second-round pick to make that move. Maybe a third if you only go back one or two spots. But you could probably pimp them for more than that because, I didn't mean to say pimp, but I kind of did. But you could get more than that because you're talking about an edge rusher and an elite corner. The Jaguars have a chance to be in the catbird seat where they could really, because they're not going to have quarterbacks on their board. The Jacksonville Jaguars are literally picking 3rd in this draft, in my opinion, if both of those quarterbacks go out. And those 2 guys are the 2 most elite players. So you would have to hope that somebody in front of them drafts for need instead of drafting for overall talent and skill. The chances of that happening with New England is very good because they signed Carlton Davis, who the Jaguars were rumored to be interested in. They have Gonzalez on the other side. If they did sign Travis, he'd either be a nickel or he'd be a wide receiver. Well, they just gave Stephon Diggs $20 million. They had the money. Everybody's talking about how bad of a deal that is for New England. New England got the money. They ain't worried about that. It's a 1-year, $23 million deal, basically. So keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes wide open and expect the unexpected. If you want to know more about these prospects, tune in to Locked On NFL Draft, where Coach Keith Sanchez, who I mentioned earlier, along with Damian Parsons, they're the real deal, man, and nobody does it like those 2 guys. On Locked On NFL Draft, make sure you tap in and make that your second listen each and every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, hope I made y'all happy. Talking about how they can line up Abdul Carter. They can do it. They just got to make Abdul Carter a better version of what y'all thought Devin Lloyd was going to be. Take care. Tune in tomorrow. I'll see you later.